When I was 16, I crashed a plane. Now, if you think you're a little shocked and confused, imagine being my mum and imagine receiving this phone call. Mum, I crashed a plane, but I'm okay. Now, my mum, like any responsible parent, decided to hand over the phone to my dad. Now, to explain, when I was in school, I was part of the RAF Cadets, and I had the opportunity to go on a gliding course for a week, which meant flying things that look like this. So gliders are basically planes with big wings, and this one's called a Vigilant. It uses an engine to get up to your desired height, and then once you reach there, you pull the throttle and you glide without the use of an engine. Now, this is a little bit different to other gliders that might use a winch or a powered aircraft to pull it up. So to get this plane up into the air, I needed to know how to do takeoffs. And this is something I was practicing one day with my instructor. I remember I was sitting on the left, him to my right, grass runway in front of me. Right hand control column, left hand on throttle. I pushed down the throttle and we started going down the runway. I don't remember much of what happened next. A lot happened at once and I didn't really get a chance to process it. All I remember was my instructor saying, "I have control," which was the formal way in which we passed the control between the two of us, except this time it was urgent and serious sounding. What had happened is that we had started taking off, but we were going upwards with not enough speed. And when that happens, you stall. Now, stalling at a couple thousand feet isn't a huge deal, but it is if you don't know how to handle it properly. And I also say it's a problem when you're only about 50 to 100 feet off the ground. Because if you stall, you can go down, and you can go down quite quickly. And this is what happened to us. One of the wings actually ended up going down. We went nose first, boom. We finally stopped, and there was silence. Now, in this silence, I realized the gravity of my situation. Well, let's be honest here. I think at this point, gravity was my friend, was it? The first thought that came to my mind was, I am in so much trouble because I'm a teenager, and naturally, if I do something wrong, I get in trouble with a grown-up, whether it's my parents or teachers, and I get grounded for a week or two. So we decided to climb out, and this is what we found. Now, it doesn't look too bad. I mean, the wings are still on, so that's something. But what you might be able to see is that the propeller's broken, which can be repaired, and one of the wheels is bent in. But what you can't see is that the engine's actually has been damaged quite a bit, and the spar has also been damaged, and that's part of the wing structure. The cost of the repairs, in the end, was more than the aircraft itself. Another consequence was that my instructor was grounded for around 6 months following the incident to allow for the completion of the investigation. So, what punishment did I receive for this? I was grounded for 1 day. Just 1 day, which you can appreciate is a confusing punishment for a teenager. So, back at the airfield the next day. New aircraft, new instructor, the same runway. And guess what? We were doing takeoffs. And with my new instructor, and rather hesitantly, I carried on. I did takeoffs again and again and again. And I remember he asked me, "How do you feel now?" And I remember I wasn't 100% of the way there, but I was okay, considering. I felt like I got some of my confidence back. And at the end of the week, I completed the course with the Ghost Solo. So this is when you do a circuit of the airfield, but you're accompanied with somebody who doesn't interfere. So as if you're doing it by yourself. If we fast forward 3 years later, I was flying these. This is a grub tutor. This is what every RAF pilot will learn all the basics of flight from before specializing to jet, multi-engine, rotary. And I joined my local university air squadron, so I got to fly this. And after doing a number of hours, I was allowed to go solo. Completely solo. At about 800 feet around the airfield. No instructor over my shoulder to tell me what to do. I can't mess up. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I wonder whether I would have been able to do that with much confidence if I hadn't recovered so quickly some years before. And I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that I learned a very important life lesson that day when I was 16. It's a classic old story of if you fall off a horse, you get back on it again, and you get back on it quickly. And I learned something else. I had a group of adults who were willing to give me another chance. I messed up, big time, really messed up. A cynic would say, well, it was your instructor's responsibility, but that's not so much the point. I cost the squadron at the gliding school an instructor and an aircraft, not just that week for the students, but for students who had followed. And yet, these group of adults were willing to let me have another go and had faith in me to do that. And I wish I appreciated that more as a teenager, but I definitely do now as an adult. I question whether young people feel like they have that second chance or know that that second chance is there, especially when they have the pressures of choosing the right career, choosing the right subjects to take them to that right career, and that when they do exams, there is no second try. When in reality, you could take those exams later on in life, and if you change your career, it's not the end of the world. They're both not easy things to do, but they're not impossible things. Now, why is this important in my line of work? My work involves the promotion of science, technology, engineering, and maths careers, otherwise known as STEM. And the reason why my job exists is that we have a current UK recruitment crisis for STEM in the UK. And we just don't have enough people working in STEM. We have recruiters who are struggling to find people the right skills and qualifications to go into these jobs, and there are employers who are worried about the future. Now, there are many reasons around this. We have people retiring and enough people to replace them. We have expanding sectors. One of the most important reasons is that we just don't have enough young people who want to go into these careers. And there are many reasons around this as well. But one of them is that young people don't see STEM as for someone like them. If we think about the two most commonly talked about careers within STEM, scientists and engineers, if we just focus on scientists for a moment, what do you think a scientist would look like to a teenager? What do you think a teenager thinks a scientist looks like? Does it look something like this? Lab coat, goggles, crazy hair. I had a group of 11 to 14-year-olds who drew these for me, and they knew they were drawing a stereotype. But what else were they going to draw if they haven't met a scientist or know one themselves? Fortunately, I found these two. Both wearing goggles, very safety-conscious children, but you can see they're more plainly clothed, less stereotypical. And the one on the right even says, a normal person, but knows more about science. And I think that's actually close to the truth than the other pictures I showed you. If we then think about what an engineer may look like to a teenager, this is what you get. Coveralls, covered in oil, spanners, coming to fix your boiler, coming to fix your car. A very stereotypical view of an engineer. Fortunately, I found this. Paul, my dad. These three children knew someone, a family member, who was an engineer. They'd actually met one. And this doesn't necessarily mean they know what engineering is. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they will go into engineering themselves. But it's a step closer because this engineer is a real person, not a character. And that's really important because one of the reasons why young people don't see STEM as for something for them, career-wise, is that STEM is for the brainy few. I've had young people who I've taught who said, "Miss, I'm not good at science." I've had young people say to me, "I don't think I'm clever enough to be a scientist. I don't think I'm clever enough to be an engineer." And it's such a shame that something like that is going to stop them going into STEM. It really is. And I don't really have a solution around this. But what I can say is that role models, real STEM professionals for them to meet is a really important thing for them. And I'm very fortunate and grateful to be able to work with such role models. I work with a group of volunteers called STEM ambassadors within the Birmingham and Solihull area. These people are volunteers who work in various areas of STEM, and they go into schools and support young people in a variety of ways. Careers talks, mock interviews, mentoring projects, lots of different things. And I always encourage my volunteers to talk about when things haven't gone quite right. And there is such thing as being too honest. But the smallest things also really matter. I had a STEM ambassador who went into school, and he said, I failed my GCSE in graphics. He got a D. And it didn't seem like a very big thing to him, but for those children, their view of a scientist was they're good at everything. And clearly, this was not the case. This clearly showed that scientists weren't good at everything. And that made a little bit of a difference. And I think us adults should really start talking to children more about failure and knowing that failure is okay. But I noticed that adults don't really like talking about failure, I think. Before I came up on stage today, I told people what I was planning to do, and on 2 individual occasions, someone had said, that's brave. And I personally don't feel like I'm brave doing this, but I can appreciate why they may think that doing something like this is brave. We just don't like talking about failure, and that failure is bad. But it's so normal. If you think about applying for a job, for example, you might apply for 100 jobs, for maybe 10 interviews and then 1 job offer, let's say. That's a completely normal thing across multiple industries. And yet, we don't talk about it in a careers talk. Now, I'm not saying I'm immune to failure. Absolutely not. I don't like failure. I don't like the feeling that comes with failure. I feel awful when I fail. And I think because of that, I still fear failure. But I'd like to think I'm trying to accept failure as part of my life and that I'm just going to continue failing for the rest of my life. But although I will continue to fail, I am not a failure. And that is so important. Failure doesn't have to define you as failure unless you let it. Failure doesn't feel great, so you might as well make the most of it. Learn from it, turn it into success, whatever it is. Try to make something from it rather than letting it define you. And if you feel like a failure for a while, that's okay too. There's no expectation for you to get over failure straight away. So, when I leave here today, I'm going to continue to fail. And when you leave here today, you will continue to fail. And that is okay. But please, take my advice. I wouldn't recommend crashing a plane. Thank you.